Hello and welcome to our sustainable journey. I am Steve. Today, let's do some worm bin fun. So there's myriad reasons to start a worm bin. We started ours because I was looking for a more organic fertilizer for our garden. And then it kind of grew into this whole business. But some people just want to compost their own food scraps, and that's awesome. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. So types of worm bins. There's a lot of worm bins out there, hungry bins and the vermi bin and other ones like that. You do not need to spend money on a worm bin. I think I've said this 100 times in these videos. These are 15-gallon totes with holes in them. I've seen people use 5-gallon buckets, plastic tubs. Whatever you have will work just fine. The worms will be just happy you're feeding them and taking care of them and giving them a good home. So in my mind, this is all opinion, the right type of worm bin is a 2-tier for a new person. For a new person starting a worm bin, there's the best thing you can do is get a 2-tier worm bin, and I'll show you why. So what happens is you've got a bottom bin and then the top bin. Worms go in the top. Holes are for drainage. So the reason drainage is important when you're a new worm farmer is because if you overfeed and put too much food scrap in there, or too many pumpkin or watermelon or something like that that breaks down and becomes water, what'll happen is it'll drown those worms in water. It just becomes too much water, and so that can cause a bad environment for your worms. And so you want to have some drainage until you get used to it, and then once you're used to it, you can just get rid of the top one, just use the bottom one, and you'll be fine. Okay. But when you're first starting out, you definitely want to kind of hedge your bets and drill a bunch of drain holes in there. The worms might go down. They may end up drowning if there's a lot of liquid on the bottom because they like to explore. It's what worms do. But this is a kind of a good start, right? So, and then we have holes on the sides as well for more airflow, right? So I usually put a lift on the bottom of just, honestly, you could put a brick under there just to raise it up a little bit in case you're worried about too much fluid. That's why these holes aren't quite lined up with the top, because I had PVC pipe that I cut into like little 3-inch sections that I put in each corner. I put one in each corner, and that would keep it up out of the water. If there was a ton of fluid, if we were feeding them pumpkins or things like that, there'd be a lot of extra liquid in the bottom. And with food scraps, we usually tend to run a little bit wet in our bins. So that is all you need. And if you did this with 5-gallon buckets, you can stack buckets and you just put holes in the bottom of the top one, and then it would drain down into the bottom one. And then every so often you're going to dump that liquid off the bottom. That liquid is called leachate. It is not worm tea. Worm tea is something you brew specifically for your plants. Leachate is just kind of the liquid runoff. It's not good stuff because you don't know what potency it's at. It could be a bunch of fermented stuff and be really bad for your garden. Some people add water to it to dilute it a little bit, and that way they can then use it to as a fertilizer for their gardens. Personally, I don't like that. We either recycle it by putting it back into our worm bins. That's actually the only thing we do really, or put it in a compost pile or something like that, but never put it on your plants, because you don't know what's in it and how good it is or how bad it is. So now you have your bin. So what do? You've got worms. You can order them online. They have them on Amazon. There's some good sellers, there's some bad sellers. Do your own research. We sell them when we have extras. There's a lot out there. I can't advise one way or the other. Some people have good experiences, some people have bad experiences with the same seller, so it doesn't really matter. But you're going to want to go with a red wiggler mix or some sort of European night crawlers, so ENCs or ANCs, and those are going to be the 3 primary ones that people that are worm farming are using. Usually it's red wigglers, they're the easiest, because the night crawlers want to dig deep, and you can't really dig too deep in these bins. These bins are only about a foot deep, so it's a lot harder for the worms to dig in. If you had night crawlers, they'd crawl through these holes and they'd hang out in the bottom, and you don't necessarily want that. So if you're going the night crawler route, don't drill holes, don't do the double bin. So then you want bedding. So bedding is more of, I think of it as more of the material you put down first, and then you never use that again. Essentially, it's just something to get things started, something the more basic, something the worms will like and that they'll easily settle into, right? There's lots of different beddings. Cocoa coir is kind of one of the main ones. That's what we have here. That's what this is. It's cocoa coir. It's just ground up coconut husks. You want to be careful with this stuff. You want to soak it and kind of squeeze out the liquid. Check the pH on it. This stuff can be salty, and so you want to make sure that it's not salty, because it can be too acidic for the worms, and so you want to just check it and make sure that it doesn't have a high salt content, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to take a bunch of this and fill it in, right? Nothing too crazy. You don't need a lot. And don't worry about it going through the holes, because it absolutely will. You can put newspaper down first if you're concerned about losing some, but honestly, it's not really a big deal. Okay, so do a little bit more. We'll do about an inch, because we're going to add roughly a half a pound to a pound of worms to this. Okay, that is good enough. That's really all you need. Not much. You can see about an inch of bedding. So this is our bedding. Now we're going to add the worms. And so I have worms from our experimental tray here that we had been using. So I'm kind of cheating a little bit, because they already have a lot of castings that they've produced. So we're going to scoop up some worms and we'll put them on top here. I'll show you that. So you can see a lot of worms. So just scoop them over, put them in. They'll go down. We're outside, it's sunny. They're gonna go down into the bedding. I'll grab a couple more. I'll leave the rest of these guys for more experiments. Okay. So spread them out a little bit. So now, because of the light, worms don't like light, they will go down into the bedding that we put in there, and they will try and hide from the light. So I don't recommend putting a lid on your worm bins the first couple of days, only because the worms like to explore, and this way it kind of promotes them going down into the bin. Some people disagree with me, and that's okay. This is just what we do. So see, you can see they're already disappearing. You can't really see them. They're going down into the bedding. And they're going to eat that bedding. You want to use bedding that is a good food source for them. Another thing that we do, because you want to keep moisture in your bins, right, is we'll put down a layer of newspaper. You can use burlap. You can use, I've seen jewel bags. Personally, we recycle those, but jewel bags work, plastic works. Just to keep the moisture in, and you'll see after a couple of days this will get wet, just from condensation and whatnot from your food scraps. Okay, and that'll help hold the moisture in and keep the worms happy. So then the next thing you're going to do, once you have a good place for them, you have covers, lights if you need it. The last thing we're going to do is add some food. So let me find some food. We've got these bins that we picked up over the weekend that'll work just fine for our purposes from our food scrap program. So I'm just going to reach into them and grab a couple scoopfuls of food scraps. So I'm going to grab the actual food. This other stuff is fine. It's all paper products and it's all compostable stuff, so we know it'll break down. Kind of curious about those cups. Usually those cups at Starbucks and whatnot have a liner, a plastic liner that you and I can't see, but the worms will eat everything but the liner. So we'll see how those cups do. Maybe I'll put one of those in here. What we're going to do is we're going to put that into the corner like that, and we're going to bury it. Okay? So there's a couple reasons we do that. One, you put it in a corner so that, okay, the food is concentrated right here. The worms, if they don't like that food, or if that food becomes acidic, or if it becomes anaerobic, is that the right word? I don't know if I'm using the right word. But if it becomes toxic to the worms, they can be over here, right? That's one reason I like our CFTs, is because they're big enough that the worms can get away from whatever's in there if it's something they don't like. So then you pocket feed. So then we feed this corner this week, this corner next week, that corner, and then you're rotating. And so the worms kind of travel throughout the whole bin, and it promotes them moving around. It promotes them breaking down everything in the bin, and it helps for a healthy worm bin for you. So let me add one of these cups, and I'll do one of these trays as well. So we'll see how well these do. So I'm going to put these in maybe a different bin, something like that, over there. And we'll do something like that over there. Oh, the worms might not like that. They were all happy. Okay. So we get it covered up. And we'll put the paper back over them. And then we'll come and check on them in probably a day or two. Make sure that they're doing okay. And that's all there is to it. It's not a complicated thing. It shouldn't be a complicated thing. It shouldn't be too much work. Let them do all the work. So now the question is when to feed them, how often to feed them, what to feed them. So we'll talk about that next time on what to feed them and when to feed them. But really, worms are fine if you leave them alone. So if you're going on vacation for a couple of weeks, the worms will be fine. Just check on them before you go. Make sure they have a little bit of food. Don't overfeed before you go on vacation. But we can talk more about that next time. But I just wanted to get an intro in here and get a a worm bin set up so that you guys could see how simple it is. And it took what, 10 minutes to set up a worm bin. I mean, yeah, I had everything, but you know, it's really not that crazy, not that complicated. I may wet this down just so that it stays down, because we're gonna leave this open for a bit, but that's all there is to it. All right, so thanks for watching. We hope to see you all next time. Have a good one. Been a lot of talk this week about telling the bees and what that means. So the Queen of England, I guess not the Queen of England, she's the Queen of the United Kingdom, passed away. And so the royal beekeeper went up to each hive and tell the bees. This tradition goes back hundreds of years, in England mainly. It used to mean, it was a superstition, everything's a superstition, right? So it meant that you had to notify the bees of any changes. So there would be births, weddings, deaths, because if you didn't notify the bees, they would sting everyone in sight, or they would produce bad honey. So obviously superstition, but that's where it comes from. And so that's why the royal beekeeper is telling the bees. And so that's what they do. Is so basically what they do is they knock on the hive and kind of tell the bees what's going on. So these are some of our bees. These are 9, 10, and then the other ones are over there, of our hives. So like these ones, when they got a new owner, you talk to them. I don't know, it's a superstition thing, but it's something you do just to tell them, hey, this is where you live now. And it's just kind of an old tradition. I think it's kind of neat. Does it help? Does it hurt? Probably not. Doesn't mean anything, but it's interesting to do. So that's what telling the bees is all about, is letting them know, so that they don't produce a bad crop of honey, or they don't sting everybody that comes near them. So there you go, telling the bees.